Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Department Q episode 6 of season 1 because there's going to be more seasons, I think. Spoilers for the episode as always, and this is a Patreon sponsored review, so thank you very much to Board Now for making the pick. So yeah, we're getting deep into the case here, and there's a couple of key scenes or themes that kind of came out of this one that really stuck out. Mainly there's a scene right at the start, a flashback between Merritt and Sam, right? One of their first meetings, where he kind of criticizes her choice of meeting location, and like I think it's a cemetery or a park, where he's talking about how, oh, you've clearly never done this type of stuff before because like you've arranged a meeting where you don't normally come, so you're probably being followed. Someone probably already knows you're talking to me. You need to be more careful. But the idea that he brings up that I thought was quite interesting was he starts asking about, hey, have you received any threatening emails or any threats or phone calls, texts, that kind of thing. And of course, we know that she either has or at least is going to, based on previous episodes. He's like, yeah, that's in place so that if something happens to you, it then can be pinned on the idea of the lone psychopath, the lone lunatic who's just a crazy person who came after you. But in actuality, it's something that's organized, that has been arranged by someone powerful in a suit. I think it's the way he puts it. So that's very interesting because everything about the way she's been held captive, every time we cut to 4x3 and she's in that tank, it does feel like this personal vendetta from the people holding her, this old woman and whoever the man with the hat is. It feels like they're doing this for personal reasons. They seem to really give a shit about it, but maybe we are setting the stage here for the idea that they are just doing their job effectively, and they're kind of just, they're just kind of awful people who are kind of enjoying being abusive about it. But maybe not. I mean, maybe it is personal. Maybe it's a mix of both. Maybe whoever wanted something to happen to her found someone that did have a personal gripe with her, so it's actually a marriage of the two. But it definitely set that idea up, and it definitely felt like we keep going down that idea throughout this episode of finding out that her boss, right, Merritt's boss, Steve Burns, that he, like, his daughter was ran off the road and accidentally, that ended up killing someone. So she wasn't necessarily at fault, but the idea being that she was threatened by someone to make Burns do something because of him being involved in this Finch case. And that's kind of the big theory of this episode, is that there's a connection between them. Now, whether or not it's just a case of because he's at a high position in the courts and all that, and that's why he's threatened to, like, get something done, or is there already a connection between him and this Finch character who's behind stuff, and, the one that Merritt was trying to put away back in the first episode, or at least in the flashbacks in the first episode. So, like, that's kind of the big question that comes up in this episode. But that theme of threatening a loved one to make someone do something also bleeds into the main plot in this episode with Mark and Jasper being his son. I'm starting to learn a lot of the side names, or at the very least I've heard them enough that I can see them in IMDb quite quickly when I'm looking. Because Mark arranges a meeting with Jasper. Hey, let's go to that ice cream shop or whatever it is that you liked when you were younger, and let's just meet and have a chat. And he sets this up. We don't even know if Jasper's going to show up for it, but much later in the episode, he is there. He's waiting for Mark. And this guy, who is some kind of gangster or just, dodgy person, comes down, sits down and says, oh, you're Mark's kid. This scene goes from 0 to 100 in, like, such a rapid pace. Because it's basically just, hey, I'm here, and it's kind of like, oh, he's going to be threatening because he wants to scare Mark, or, hey, pass this message on to Mark so that he'll back off, or whatever. Instead, he just immediately starts threatening to basically just, like, sell him to some dangerously perverted men to do all sorts of things to him. And they won't kill you. You'll have to live with the horrible experience of being effectively gang assaulted. I'm trying to avoid certain words for YouTube's sake, but he's like, oh, they'll put things inside you, dry and wet, living and dead, human and animal. Like, it's like, Jesus. And the kid's getting absolutely terrified. He's sitting there, wetting himself basically. And so then this escalates, right? And you're watching this scene, and it feels like, okay, this is interesting because you've got this character who is very aggressively threatening Mark's stepson. And even then, it's arguable, like, is he even technically stepson still, given that he's not with his mum anymore? But regardless, it's a weird relationship. It feels super intimidating, and I think to its credit, this character of Jasper, who's just been kind of the annoying, angsty teenager every time I've seen him, seeing him shit scared throughout this scene actually really humanized him in a way that I don't think he's felt like a real character up until this point. And I think the other effect to this is that Mark actually arrives before this guy's leaving, right? So the guy gets up to leave and says something in passing to him as he walks out. But Mark takes one look at the face on Jasper, sees how he looks, sees how scared he looks, and immediately gets that something threatening has just happened. So he just turns around and follows this guy outside. And for the second time in 2 episodes, as is pointed out by his boss later in the episode, Moira grills him for this. He is caught on camera in public, absolutely losing his shit. This time even more severe, because this guy just threatened. He doesn't even know what he threatened, he just saw the after effect of it. You know, he's a detective, he saw the results of whatever's just happened, and he chases this guy down, and the guy spits blood on him after one hit or whatever, but he ends up beating him up, and it's not until he's down on the ground and he's about to kick him in the face, and tons of people are filming this, that Jasper's the one who yells at him to stop, and he stops, and that de-escalates things. But this is all set up. That's the other part of this, is that this guy intentionally drew him out to where he knew the street camera was. They intentionally did this. He wasn't even at his own car. This was all a set up to try and, you know, Moira even says, whoever set this up probably wants you fired, so I'm not going to do that, but I'm pissed. I'm pissed that you fell for this and that you're this much of a loose cannon. We'll just get into cop tropes at this point. You're a loose cannon, Mark. Hand in your badge. And not a gun because it's Scotland, but to pretend there was a gun so you can hand it in. So I really like this scene, right? I think both parts of this scene, I did think the guy was being so aggressive it felt almost out of the, like, over the top for the show, because it was just so absurd, all the things he was threatening to Jasper. But by the end I liked it because I realized that I was very invested in Mark finding out. And when Mark actually saw the tail end of it and then went and beat this guy up, as much as he was acting unhinged, it's probably the most in the entire show I've been on Mark's side where I'm like, you know what, just do it. Just beat the piss out of this guy. Like, he deserves to have the piss beat out of him. Go for it, right? I'm actually rooting for it to happen at this. And I was like, okay, I'm actually quite invested. I'm invested in his, like, yeah, he's an angry character, he has got problems, but kind of like the Hulk, sometimes there was a good place to channel that anger, and it felt like this guy was deserving of that anger being channeled on him. Not that that's healthy for Mark's development by any stretch, I'm not saying that, but on a pure catharsis level, I enjoyed seeing this guy get beat up a bit. So yeah, like, so they're going after, it's like, okay, so either they're threatening Jasper to make Mark back down, even though I think they know he's not going to do that because he's Mark and his character just isn't, you know, it's just not in his character to back down. But yeah, maybe the goal was get this on camera, disgrace him, get him fired, make all this fall apart. And this all ties into the start of the episode, which is the previous detective who worked on this case that they went and talked to a couple of episodes ago. Fergus is his name. He, you know, it turns out has also been visited by someone menacing, and he's got like a nasty bit of bruises and a black eye, and he fought them off. But there's a really nice bit at the end of this scene where, well, two things. One, Mark is actually a little bit human towards him. He's a little bit empathetic, to which Fergus says it's unsettling and just makes him more of an arsehole, which I thought was quite funny. But I really like the aftermath, though, where Akram comes over, even though Fergus said, oh, maybe your Akram's the inside man, maybe he's the one you can't trust. But Akram came over to Fergus at the end of the scene and said, I think you did a good job with this case 4 years ago when you were investigating it. I think the reason why you were pulled off that case is because you were doing a good job. We're following in your footsteps, and you were shut down because you were getting somewhere. I think you were going to solve it. You were getting closer, and someone shut it down. And that, you know, this was teased before with Mark asking Moira about who up top told you to pull the case. And again, it's not that he was accusing Moira of making that decision herself, but just that someone further up the food chain said drop it, and that reverberated down. So this idea that there's people in positions of power not wanting this to be uncovered for whatever the reason is, seems to be where we're kind of going, which is, it's I think it's making for some compelling turns. Although I'd maybe argue that it may be at the cost of some of the mystique, right? I think inherently Conspiracies of people in power pulling strings, while it's obviously got the chess game sort of feel of like all these moving parts, it's inherently less mysterious and kind of, I don't want to say spooky, but like, there's something kind of like more atmospheric about the idea of just like someone with a grudge doing something sinister and like this unknown force. Once you start to put it into conspiracy, just people in power making decisions, inherently it becomes a very different beast in terms of what it is. Having said that though, now we're 6 episodes in, there's a lot of moving parts to it. Like, I think if it was going to be this many episodes long, it kind of has to have these new developments in different areas it goes into. At least in the way it's progressed. So I have no real faults with the way it's developing in terms of where the story's heading. I think it makes for some compelling scenes in this episode, even though I don't think overall the idea of people in charge making decisions like this and like corruption being the most exciting or intriguing way it could go. If that makes sense. Like I think on paper it's not as interesting, but it is leading to some compelling scenes, like this guy threatening Jasper and Mark's reaction to it, and the fight afterwards where they're telling Moira their theory that Burns is connected to this Finch guy and that they want to look into this, and her being like, you don't have any evidence, but she's kind of like, oh god, like what if you're onto something, this is the big if it is. Like, there's compelling scenes coming out of it, so it's hard to be that mad, even if like, I'm not at face value as excited about it in the same way as I was when it was just a mysterious stalker doing something. But inherently it wants to kind of evolve beyond that. So, and then the other thing this episode with Mark is the fact that they think they've arrested someone for his shooting, and Mark goes back to the crime scene, and interestingly, he starts talking very, very interestingly about the young police officer who was there that day that let them in, and he starts like getting a little bit almost conspiracy theory about him, about how he was a really smart guy that, graduated at the top of his class, and yet he was kind of playing a little dumber, and he never said the name of the victim with the knife in his head. It's like he was intentionally, and I don't even think he's necessarily saying he was corrupt and he's evil and he's up to something, but more that there's something else going on, or at the very least, or maybe he was also scared into setting this up. Even though it resulted in his own death, which he maybe wouldn't have known about. But it was an interesting couple of things. Like, he even said, when we arrived that day, he said, oh, the guy's daughter called it in, and he turns to the two other cops who are investigating the shooting, and he's like, do we even know if he actually has a daughter? Might want to look into that. And I was like, that's an interesting question. Did no one check that if he has a daughter or not? So, yeah, they do some interesting stuff there. They do a lineup with the guys all wearing masks, because that's all he saw was the eyes in a balaclava. And he says there's one that he makes step forward, but he's like, look, that guy looks guilty of something, but he is not guilty of shooting me. That's not him. So I like the weight of that scene and the way it's presented, where Moira actually gets kind of like, hey, it's just us in here. Are you sure? It felt like it got really human for a second, in a way where all of the I'm your boss and like the hierarchy and the anger bullshit all went out the window, and she's just talking to the victim of a crime, because that's effectively what he was, even if he and maybe a lot of the anger he has right now is that desire to not feel like a victim, because that makes him feel weak and powerless, and he tries to maintain some level of power over who he is and what's around him, because that's his character. So yeah, there's some interesting stuff there with the development of that stuff, and where some of this might go and how it's tied into everything else is very hard to say. Like at this point, because we're talking about people up the food chain being corrupt and maybe making these decisions, and like merits like kidnapping is more orchestrated by powers that be rather than just people with a grudge, it's starting to feel a lot more possible that the shooting of Mark is more connected. Maybe not directly connected, but it's entirely possible that this Finch guy is at the top of the pyramid that leads to both the Merritt stuff happening and also his shooting. And I guess I'm weighing up how I feel about that, because there's nothing necessarily indicating that yet, right? I'm not saying there is. But we've had this secondary mystery going since episode 1 of who shoot Mark and his partner. And I think for the first half of the show, I would have said, I'll be really annoyed if this ends up in any way connected to Merritt's story. I think the way it's going, there's a lot more possibility for it to happen without being complete contrived bullshit. I'm still not excited about the possibility, but at least we're in a world now where, like, these things could end up being somewhat connected, just in the sense that they're both part of the same kind of interconnected crime world that we've built over the course of the season. I'm kind of like weighing how I feel about that a little bit, but we'll see how they do it, because like I said, some of the stuff that's brought up in this episode might have not sounded that compelling to me if you told me about it back after episode 1, but because we've built to it over the course of 6 episodes and we've kind of like added layers as we've went forth, it's it's like some stuff has landed maybe a lot more better than I would have thought it would have. So hey, they're still looking into things from the previous like episodes that they bring up. They bring up the other lawyer that had the affair with Merritt. They talk to him for a scene, and that's a compelling enough sequence where they're asking him a bunch of questions, and he's kind of pissed off because they're talking about the affair, but ultimately he's then mad because it all turns into asking about Burns, and he's like, no, Burns, cared about Merritt. He tried to help her career, like he was invested in her career. I can't believe he would have done anything to sabotage or be behind anything, which almost convinced me that he was. The way this guy was going to bat for him made me think, okay, Burns definitely did something. Maybe he's not a complete, mustache twirling villain by any stretch, but he definitely compromised something somewhere for his own reasons, right? Maybe it's because, his daughter was being threatened and it was like her or Merritt, so he's like, okay, he made a choice. But he did something. Like, I'm convinced of it just based on that guy's reaction, if nothing else. Now, it may not be exactly what they're all assuming he may have did at this point, but I suspect he did something. So, and we also get a few more flashbacks with Merritt. Interestingly, the context of the other flashback, outside of the opening one, is the time where they seemingly first have sex, where the second place to meet up is at a hotel room. It's a place where she's been, and there's a bit of tension in the air as they're talking, like, do we trust each other? What are you looking into? Do you care about looking into Burns? So again, even in the flashbacks with Merritt, we have someone talking about Burns, and that he might be worth investigating. So again, that links up to what we're doing in the present day, so it feels thematically connected, which is nice. But ultimately, it becomes this thing where, like, she even says they're sharing a moment, and it's kind of this weird, like, tense, like, are we feeling something here? And it's like, hey, if we're going to trust each other, like, how do I know you're not wearing a wire? And it basically becomes an excuse for them both to take their clothes off. And they step closer to each other, and it's all very kind of, atmospheric lighting from the street lights outside. It's got that orange glow to it, and they're up against the window. And notably, the context for this is that she's thinking about this relationship, trying to figure out how all this, like, connects to why she's in the tank and why she was taken. But she actually starts masturbating, thinking about this scene. This clearly is a passionate memory for her. Obviously, it is a passionate scene. There's a lot of tension and build up to them finally embracing. It kind of cuts away before it gets really into it, right? It cuts to her in the present, but she's caught on camera, right? The old woman who's monitoring her notices it and then, like, speaks to her and says, "Oh, at it again, Merritt, you dirty." And cracks another joke or whatever. So it's just another reminder that she can't even have this moment to herself. So it feels very cruel, and it feels very, it's just another layer as to how awful this imprisonment is. But later they're putting food through to her, through this little kind of like hatch area, and I laughed at the can of iron brew because obviously Scotland. But the can of iron brew explodes because of the pressure. And then the door doesn't quite close properly or something. I actually wasn't entirely sure how it wasn't working, but it seemed like a potential exploit for her to maybe try and escape. It seemed like something wasn't working properly. We even hear the old lady saying that to the guy, hey, that door's broken again or something. and she's like watching, and she has the broken can, or the crushed can of Iron Brew. And I thought it was going somewhere darker for a minute, because earlier in the episode, Akram was asking Rose about her past and why she spent time behind the desk and what happened. And we find out through a couple of scenes that she had hit an elderly couple with her car and was suicidal afterwards. And part of the reason why she keeps going to is it James? I keep forgetting the partner who's in the hospital's name. But she keeps going to him and like hanging out with him, partly because she doesn't want to go home. But she reveals to Akram that no, like he was there for me, and he kind of like, like it's almost like a darkly funny thing where, like my actual attempt on my life never really went anywhere. It was never going to kill me. I didn't cut deep enough. Blah blah blah. I passed out at the sight of blood. But what really saved me was that he kept checking in on me afterwards. He was very nice and human to me, and it's like, okay, that's kind of sweet. But it did put the idea in my head when that crushed Iron Brew can was there. I was like, oh, you could use that to do something bad. I thought it was going down a dark path, but it ended up being more about, oh no, the decompression thing's not quite working as it's supposed to. So it's setting up like a potential way for her to try and get out. Now how that goes, I don't know. Also worth mentioning, the guy in the hat did seem to also be watching her masturbate like through the window. Obviously that feels very menacing, but I mean, we'll see if that becomes something or anything. But yeah, it's like, obviously we keep getting these updates and reminders of Merritt's current position and her being kind of, and it is interesting though, because even if like let's say Steve Burns knows about what happened to her to some extent, or he at least knows he helped play a part in it happening because he had to like help to like protect his daughter or his career, or he's just an evil piece of shit, whatever the reason is. Does he know she's still alive? Does he know she's been held captive somewhere? Probably not, I would guess, but I don't know. There's a lot of characters here. There's a lot of moving parts. I mean, if I have a critique for the show, honestly, at this point, is that sometimes like there's so many like parts to the case that they're talking about, because we're talking about the Finch case, we're talking about what happened with Merritt and her family back in the day, we're talking about Merritt's life around the time of her kidnapping, we're talking about Mark's like shooting and all the stuff around that. There's so many like details for all these cases and so many names been thrown around that every so often I do feel a little bit like, okay, I'll just trust the show is making sense right now and like pick up like what I'm supposed to get from this scene by the end. Because sometimes like the first time they said the name Finch in this episode, I'm like, Finch, I don't know. And I was like, okay, that was the guy that was in court, and but like it came together as they were talking about it. But there's so many names and so many things they're talking about that it does get a little bit overwhelming. And I don't know if, like, obviously they want to have all these details so they can have all the different parts and all the different things that could be red herrings and all the things that could build into something. But I do wonder if maybe just a slightly more streamlined version of the scripts, just to kind of make things more clear when they need to be clear and so on, would be good. But it's a minor nitpick overall, but it's just a sort of thing where it sticks out to me in the writing a little bit, and I'm sure some people like that it's this way, that there's a lot of details that you can miss, and then maybe on a rewatch you would pick up everything even better. But I think like the best writing would make sure the audience gets everything, and not in a way where it's speaking down or it's being like blunt or far too in your face, but just like I think there's maybe a slightly smarter, more elegant way to bring up all these details without feeling overwhelming to the audience. But oh yeah, the other scene that I want to talk about was Akram once again being a badass. And this led to a really funny, well, it led to a few funny moments actually, but the moment that really got me is after the fact, when they're in what's her face's office, right? And they're in Moira's office, and like they're like, hey, where's this suspect who's behind this setup of Carl? And it's like, oh, he's in the hospital. He fell down the stairs. And the way Mark looks over at Akram, and then we see Moira's also looking at Akram, and Akram's just kind of looking up to the side, like, la-di-da, don't look at me, nothing I did. He did fall down the stairs. He was arguably pushed down the stairs by Akram, of course. But yeah, this big tough guy comes out when they go to speak to him, and Akram's expecting resistance, so he plays it smart. He takes off his badge, leaves it with Rose, and he does technically only act in self-defense because this guy moves to hit him. He defends, and the resulting kind of hit and arm twist leads to him going down the stairs where he breaks his leg. He does also step on the broken leg to hurt him so that he'll talk and give him information. But it's a funny sequence, though. The funniest thing by far was the reactions of everyone in the meeting afterwards, but also the neighbor who just was like, I'm not going to call an ambulance for him. F that C was the sentence that was said, which did make me laugh. It's such an awkward sentence to have to say in a review where I can't swear that severely, because all the humor of it's just drained by censoring it. But it was funny. It was, it's not like his neighbors were fellow criminals who were going to stick up for him. No, they're like, no, that guy's a prick. We don't want to help this guy. Keep us out of it. So, no, very, very interesting. And then the other thing I guess I should probably bring up is that Carl does go to the therapist office, but he's surprised when this old lady comes out instead. And this is the old lady who usually works here. And she's like, oh yeah, I healed from my thing much quicker. So let's get started, shall we? And of course, Mark just kind of gets mad. He's like, hey, what happened to the other therapist? And she's like, oh yeah, it's a shame no one told you, because you really should end your relationship with your therapist. It should be a kind of a neat close, because you'll feel abandoned otherwise. Like, yeah, absolutely. And he just kind of ends up storming out. Pretty much. He was upset Kelly MacDonald wasn't there. She's too busy doing lanterns right now to be in more Department Q. That's a silly joke, because obviously this show came out last year. But you know what I'm getting at, though. So yeah, I just wanted to bring that up. I don't really have too much to say about it, other than maybe, he's driven his therapist away, and I suspect he's going to seek her out specifically. Maybe he's going to reach an even lower low in the next episode or two, and he will go seeking help, actually willing to go through real therapy now, because he, maybe something bad happens, or he loses his shit even more than he already has. I mean, hell, I could see that even being the end of the season. Like, after everything's over, like, the ending's him going to get therapy from her, being like, okay, I'm willing to grow now. I'm willing to actually try and deal with my shit. But which is not a real suggestion, but I could see a version where it ends with that, as like him finally willing to do something. But yeah, anyway, that's my thoughts on this episode of Department Q. All the wheels are spinning, and to its credit, I think the character moments, particularly Akram's usually great. I think Mark has a couple of good scenes in this episode. I'm finding him a bit more likable now, 6 episodes in, temper and all. So that is good. And then the plot's thickening a little bit with like what's actually going on. And I think in some ways the mystique's being lost, but in other ways, like, there is kind of an interesting web forming. So I'll see how it all clicks together as we get near the end. But let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments below. Like, subscribe, all that stuff helps out a bunch if you do, and you can support everything over at Patreon. Patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. So thank you once again for watching. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?